Thank you so much for dropping by our channel today. My name is Leah, and I'm so glad you're here. You're about to watch the most recent sermon preached and recorded during our weekend services here at Chapel Springs Church. If you're new here, don't hesitate to pop over to our website at chapelsprings.org for more information about our great church. Enjoy the message.
How precious are your thoughts to me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I were to count them, they would be more in number than the sand. For when I awake, I am still with you. O Lord, you have searched me and you have known me. You know my sitting down and you know my rising up. You understand my thoughts from afar. You comprehend my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all of my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it all together. You have hedged me behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your presence? And where can I flee from your spirit? For if I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, O Lord, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, God, you are still there. Your right hand will lead me, and your hand will hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness does not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. You have formed me in my mother's womb, and you know each and every one of my parts. I will praise you because I know I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, O God, and that my soul knows full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written. The days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious are your thoughts to me, God? How great is the sum of them? If I were to count them, they would be more in number than the sand. For when I awake, I am still with you.
Sand, it's amazing. Sand arts. Hey, well, we are heading toward the end of our summer series, which means the end of our summer is coming to a close, but our heart for this series has just been to get you into the Psalms and to use imagery and summer imagery to help point you to God and to point your heart toward God. And our prayer is that as we go forward, a lot of these images will trigger you throughout your life back to these Psalms, and I'll lead you into a place of prayer. And of course, this week our image is sand. And yeah, it was beautiful doing the art, but let's be honest, we have a love-hate relationship with sand. It gets everywhere. It's a part of the beach you don't want to take back, that you take back. And you take it back between your toes and your belly button and your scalp. Probably other places I won't mention. But it just won't go away. And in fact, last weekend I was walking around my house. I had a sundress on. And I had my hands in my pocket, and I just kept playing with something in my pocket. And at some point, I was like, what am I playing with? What's going on? It felt very soothing. And I pulled my hands out, and I had grains of sand all over my fingers. And I knew immediately where it was from. I have not been to the beach this summer, but I've been to Egypt. I was in Egypt in May, and I knew immediately. I wore that dress, and I wore it the day I went to the pyramids, and it was very windy. So it's amazing how this sand somehow ended up in my pockets, and I've washed the dress twice. I promise, I've washed it twice, but I obviously I don't take the pockets out, which I think you're supposed to do, so I will do that next time. But, you know, I love the imagery here that the psalmist David gives us, that the grains of sand, we can't get rid of them. There's so many of them, but he uses it as a metaphor to God's thoughts towards us. And I want to say, just right up front here, there may be a tendency in your heart to say, well, that's indulgent. I give you permission to indulge in the love of God. This is what he created us for. I know what you do. I know you go to work. You do great things. You achieve great things. But our ultimate purpose is to be in communion with God. And his heart is for you. And he wants to woo you. He wants to draw you to him. And he wants to do that here today. And so as we open Psalm 139, as I mentioned, this is a Psalm of David. We don't know a whole lot about this Psalm of when he wrote it, but I think from just reading it and knowing his life from our Old Testament, I think he probably wrote this in his later years, because it's a voice of someone with confidence and intimacy with God. So I think this was after he matured a while. And so this psalm is describing this relationship between the divine and the human. And David starts off leaning into the fact that our God is one who searches and knows. And these are some of the most beloved verses of all Scripture. I think it's probably in the top 3 of the Psalms that most people would know. Even if you don't know the number, you will recognize these. Like the first few verses here. You have searched me, Lord. You know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in, behind, before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. We love those verses. And one of the things I love about this psalm is it opens up in a place of intimacy. Often in the Psalms, you see it opens up in praise, it opens up in thanksgiving, and then it gets to this place of knowing God, this place of intimacy. But David, right from the start here, he starts in a place of being known. He starts in that place of intimacy, being known by the divine creator. And so what you have here is this IU relationship. And as you look at those verses, it says, you discern, you know, you searched, and you searched me. You know me. And so there's this you, me, and it's very emphatic in the Hebrew language. And it's meaning to, because it's emphasizing the divine human relationship. That's the purpose of this psalm. And so there's a divine probing that's happening here of God just knowing him, knowing David, knowing the psalmist. and knowing him very intimately. This is what we are created for. And we need to recognize that humans, we have limitations. And we have limitations that God doesn't have. God is a limitless God. He knows us. Even without us saying a word, he just knows us. I have to sit with you. I have to ask you questions. You have to open up and reveal things to me in order for me to know you. And even then, I will never exhaust knowing you. Thankfully, because I can't handle it. And you couldn't handle knowing me fully. This is part of the goodness of our creation. Like, God created us with limits. But God is limitless. So this is one of the unique things about our relationship with the divine. He can handle you. How many of you say that? They can't handle me. You can't even handle me right now. Like, you know what's going on. But God can. One of the things that I really love to lean into here is the fact that David takes us to the ordinary of God just being right there with him in his comings and goings, when he's lying down, when he's standing up. He's talking about the ordinary daily habits that we all have. And he recognizes God's right there in it. He knows what I'm doing. He knows what I'm not doing, okay? He knows the motives behind it. There's this all-knowing right there in the daily ordinary places of our lives. We tend not to really lean into this as much as we should. So I want to take a moment with it because it's vital. Sometimes in the church and in our spiritual lives, we can lean into the highs. We go to seek an experience that of a real encounter, and we have a bar for what that means. But here's God just wanting to be in the ordinary places. And I was cleaning out my books the other day, and it's not going well at all. At all. They're everywhere at my house. And I ran across this book that I bought back in 2016 at the recommendation, I think, of a mentor. And so I thought, I need to read this. I think it has something to do with revivals and of this guy's life. So read this. This is a guy he lived in the 20th century. He was a Jesuit. And he gave his life to teaching high school students, especially the young men. And so I'm reading this book, and after a few pages, it gets really good because he tells this experience, this encounter he has with God when he's, I think, in Rome. And so I just keep reading because I'm like, wow, that's amazing that he had that kind of what I would call almost a Pentecostal experience in his life. And so I kept reading thinking, oh, he's going to go crazy, he's going to get kicked out, and he's going to become Pentecostal and all this stuff. No, the book actually started getting really boring, and I found myself flipping through the pages going, well, where's the next big thing? And I just felt the Spirit just saying, Stephanie, you're missing it. His day-to-day response to me is the next big thing. It's how God's Spirit came in his ordinary daily life, and that's what he wants for us. He wants to be there and to know us in those ordinary places. What the psalmist does here is he leans in even more into the whole idea that God is an all-present God. He's everywhere at all times. And remember, God can know us from a distance. He's God. But he chose to be present and be with us. And ultimately, he shows this in the person of Jesus by becoming flesh and walking among us. And so that's what the psalmist is leaning into, the fact that this is a all-present God. As we go on here in verse 7, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The nights will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. We serve a with us God. Yes, he is transcendent. He is beyond us. But in his beyondness, he is with us. And there are times in our life where we can say, I don't feel it. I don't even see it. But that's when we have to turn to Psalms like this, because this is good theology. To know that God's with me anyway. I don't need to feel it. I don't need to see it. I just know, because this is who God is. It's his character to be with us. He doesn't get mad. He doesn't give us attitude. He doesn't turn his back on us. He's with us. It's just part of his nature. And so the psalmist beautifully goes into the poetry here. It talks about, you know what, I can try to outrun God, but it's not going to work. And some of us probably have those testimonies. But this nagging feeling of, I can't stop thinking of God deep inside. And it's because he can't stop thinking of you. And he's pulling you in. Then he talks about going to the highest highs and the lowest lows. And the highs, you know, we all have highs in life. We have successes. We have those places that we love to be. We wish we were there all the time, right? Those mountain experiences. And sometimes we're even encountering God in profound ways during those times. But remember, God's with you in those, because there's a tendency to start leaning on ourselves, leaning on our talents. And God is the one who knows you're not a self-made man or woman. He is with you where you're at there, even in that success and that high. He's right there to sustain you in it. So don't forget, during those seasons, he's present, but he's also present in the lows, which the lows are part of our normal, ordinary lives. We have the dark places, and the text here speaks of Sheol. It's the place of the dead that's spoken of in the Old Testament, or the underworld. It's where they believe the dead went. And it's spoken of throughout the Old Testament and even in the Psalms as a place of absence from God's presence. So it's fascinating to me that David would take this metaphorically and say, God, even in the darkest places of my life that would seem to be absent of you, you're still there. Even in those depths. And it's important for us to remember, often we can beat ourselves up in these places. There's different reasons we end up in dark places. Sometimes it's just the way life works out. Circumstances. Sometimes it's our own stupidity. Let's be honest. We can just make some dumb decisions. And God uses it. He teaches us, he gives us wisdom, and hopefully we grow in that. Other times, it's other people's schemes. Their misuse maybe of influence and power in your life, and you end up in a very dark place. God's there. He's right there with you. And this is where it's vital to remember that God is your companion in the darkness. Going back to the whole thing of limitations, often we get mad at one another. You've disappointed me because you weren't with me the way you should have been in my darkest hour. Now, we are called to walk alongside one another and to be present. But I've come to see over the years, as I sit with a lot of people in dark places, and I've dealt with it in my own life, I will often start to say that to people who have been there, who have been present. But I was trying to make them present in a way they're not designed to be present. That it's a place that only God can be with me. And we all experience loss. We all experience pain and deep loneliness in those dark places. But God companions us in them. it's a place for him, and it's unique. We all have our unique relationship with whatever loss we've had, but that's for you and God to live through and work through together, because in the dark caverns of isolation and loss and loneliness, that's where the intimacy is forged. And that's where hope is conceived. So you may have those dark places, and maybe people have not been present the way they should, or maybe they should, and they're just not meeting that need. Ultimately, it's God's place. It's where God is to meet you at and carry you through those dark seasons. Now, as we go on here in the text, I think what happens with David here, he's talking about the darkness, and then all of a sudden he goes into his creation story. And I think what happens is this triggers the big creation story, because if you remember in the creation story, what do you have? You have darkness, you have formlessness, and then you have the Spirit of God hovering over those places, right? And I think what David is saying, yes, God's right there hovering, and just like in creation where God created and formed in the darkness and brought life, that's what he's done with me. And so this is where he says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you." So the psalmist goes from the highs of heavens and the lows of hell and darkness to the very beginning of his life. You got to remember that David was a man on the run. Throughout a lot of his life, he had people chasing him for his life, trying to kill him. And so he needed to be firmly rooted in the fact that God gave him life, and he gave his life purpose. And so what David is doing here, he's telling us his identity and the fact that he is formed by the great former. He's created by our Creator. That's his identity, one who's been created by God. And we can almost overlook that, but don't, because this is critical during your life to know your identity. Who are you? Who do you belong to? And that when you're feeling pressure and you feel like people are after you and life circumstances are coming down on you, and you can know that God gave me purpose. He formed me. He had intent for my life. And if it gets snuffed out, it gets snuffed out, but not before God says so. He has purpose for me. So identity, David's rooting his identity in this. And there's great mystery in these verses here. It's acknowledging the mystery of life, and with the potential of David dying, this would have been critical for him to hold on to the fact that he is made with purpose. And here's a couple things to remember, though, because he did have people after him, and they're trying to kill him. But we are all people with power. God created us to be in partnership with him. He created the world, and then he created us to steward it, to be life givers. That's one of the amazing things as humans is we get to give life. We get to form life. We birth life. And that's part of God's purposes for us. And there's a mystery in that. There's a mystery in the fact that we come alongside one another and we speak life, or we can take life. And as David's on the run, he's very well aware of these people have some power, and they're not using it for what God intended it to be. And we live in a world that we need to be reminded that we have power, and we can use it for life or for death. Life or death. And there's a lot of talk right now around life. And I know there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hatred, but keep the conversations going with people, because we need to have these conversations about the power that we have to create life or to end life. And the other thing to keep in mind here is we are people who ponder. And great things are happening, I think, even though it seems really intense in our world, or especially in our nation right now. Like, people need to have these conversations, and we need to be there as people who know they are designed by God to give life. We need to be there having the conversations and helping steer it and facilitate those conversations. We need to be also people who ponder. I'm very well aware of the fact that we can read these beautiful poetic verses, and we can see the amazing video and the cute little, chubby-faced baby that was created out of sand, and say awe and love it. But I'm very well aware that that can trigger a lot of people. Can stir up a lot in you of questions like, why if God was with me from the very beginning and he formed me in my mother's womb, why didn't he place me in a family that wasn't so deformed, that you're still dealing with consequences from? Or I know for some of you it could be the questions of the loss of a child, or things that went wrong in the womb, and you go back to these texts and you're like, God, where were you? What was going on? These are part of the questions that we can lean into and ask God. These are part of the mysteries of life and death that we don't have easy answers to. In fact, I'd say most of the time we won't have the answers in this life on them. But these are deep wrestlings within us. And these are questions that people are asking that we need to sit with them in. And I want to just say that if you're someone that texts like this, it just shuts you down, it's okay. But sit before God and wrestle with him. He's a wrestler. There's a whole story in the Old Testament of the God who wrestles. It's okay to ask them the hard questions. It's okay to push back. It's okay to dig deep and to ask him questions that we would say often, you can't ask God that. You can ask him anything. Lean into it, face to face. Ask him. Invite him into those deep questions. And be people who sit alongside and listen to the questions. Just sitting in their presence of their whys and their hows. The reality is, though, to be people who ponder, we have to give space to pondering. We like to stay busy. We like to spend hours on TikTok, Instagram. We like to just skim through things and try to keep our minds busy. Give space to ponder. Some of you, you've got really deep questions. And if I can say, some of you have got some real beef with God. But you're just keeping your mind going so that you don't have to talk to him about it. Find the place of silence. Find the place of solitude and sit with him. Invite someone into it if you need to, someone with some wisdom and grace as well. But create that space. And this is why I love the Psalms. that we can turn to them throughout all of life's circumstances for ponderings, because they deal with all kinds of circumstances in life. And so continually go back to these. Keep them in front of you, at least weekly, if not daily, to where you're turning to the Psalms and praying through the Psalms. The psalmists invite us to ponder with them. That's what they are. They're invitations to ponder with them. And we're pondering, we're considering the beautifully awful complexities of life's mysteries. It's all not black and white. And that's okay. It's beautifully awful. Well, there's another part to the psalm here. We didn't read it, but we can't ignore it. We would like to, because this is some of the most beautiful poetry here in Psalm 139, throughout all of Scripture. But then there's a mood change. This is where in music you would go to the minor key. It would get really dark. Because listen what David says. If only you, God, would slay the wicked. Notice his beef with God. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Those are some pretty strong words. Here's one thing I want you to get from this, is that even though God was present in David's life, so were enemies. And God's presence is with you throughout life, but you will have enemies. And we know from the Apostle Paul in the church to Ephesus, he makes it clear that we are no longer fighting flesh and blood. That's what David thought he was fighting here. But Paul says we are fighting rulers and powers in the spiritual realm. And we often don't acknowledge that part, because some of you will be with me on this. You've been to those churches where it gets way crazy into the spiritual realm. Everything's a demon. But then we can go to the other extreme and completely ignore it. But Paul's like, you better not ignore it. That's what you're really fighting against. So you will have both. But remember, the divine presence is with you. But here's what I do love about these verses with David, his honesty with God. He's in this place of intimacy in his heart. He just it just vomits all over God. And that's good. We need to be able to just share with him what's going on, because he knows it anyway, right? He has searched us. He knows us. He knows, and he even said it. David said it before it even hits my tongue. God, you know it. God knew this stuff was deep within him. However, David is justifying his hate. And then he starts using God language. Well, God, I hate them because they hate you. No, he hates them because they're trying to kill his life. And he likes it. We've been there, right? We try to justify things like this, and we start using Christianese. We start using Christian language to justify it. No, stop it. That's what David's doing here. But then here's what David does do well again. He invites God. Look at this. Search me, God, and know my heart. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Exposure of what's going on can lead to an invitation for you to give God. God, I know what just came out of me. Will your Spirit search me? We've got the Spirit of God in us. Like he can search us throughout our day. Search me. Lord, search me and know me. Take those things out of me. Bring them to transformation So I want to encourage you to create regular time and space to allowing God to search you throughout your day, throughout your week. Don't ignore what's going on in you. Invite God into it. So, David, some beautiful stuff there, kind of ended a little iffy, but he redeemed himself a little bit. But here's the thing, David was a human, just like us. He had limitations, just like us. He had a sinful heart, just like us. He wasn't our Savior. God used him in great ways. He anointed him for his work. But I want to point something out. On David's deathbed, he's ready to turn the throne over to Solomon, his son. So he calls Solomon into him, and he's in the final maybe minutes, hours of his life. And he says some really good things to Solomon. Like he kind of gives him a pep talk here. He says, be strong, act like a man, observe what the Lord requires of you. I mean, those are all good things, right? That's a good father-son talk. Well, he didn't stop there. He then says, Solomon, you remember the guy Joab? Joab slaughtered my 2 commanders. You're a man of wisdom, so do what's wise, but yet make sure he goes to the grave in turmoil. Okay, Dad. And then he says, but you remember these two brothers? They were with me. When I was on the run against your brother, these 2 brothers were with me. They stood by my side. Show them kindness. And then he says, Solomon, you remember that Benjamite? He spoke curses over me. Solomon, you're a wise man. However, these are his words. Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood. Those were the last words of David. Words of vengeance. You guys, David's not our hero here. He's just a man. He's just a human like us. But he ended with a heart of vengeance. But you know who didn't end in a heart of vengeance? It was Jesus. In fact, Jesus shows up, walks the earth, shows us how to have face-to-face relationship with the Father. And then he says, I'll take on all the vengeance. He took on David's vengeance. He took on the vengeance of all David's enemies. He said, I'll take it on. Then he goes to the cross. And there's Jesus, hair mangled, covered in blood, his head ready to go to the grave in blood. Yet he cries out, Father, forgive them. They don't have a clue what they're doing. Those are very different final words than David. Jesus. That's who we turn to today as we come to the communion table. He gave it all. He gave it all. If you do not have communion elements, just raise your hand. Ushers will come. We have open communion here. That means you don't need to be a member of the church to partake with us. And I just want you to hold on to these. Our band's going to lead us in a time of worship, but I just want you to offer yourself before God. You know, we're taught in Scripture that we need to allow the Spirit of God to examine us before we receive communion. So let's give space to that. Let's give space to that intimate place for the divine and the human to commune and for the divine to search us.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and make sure you turn your bell notifications on so you know each and every time we push out another video. Until next time, let's go live for Jesus.